Hello, my name is Abraham Klein, and today I want to talk about something that I have not talked a lot about in quite a while, and it's something that I lived with for a long time, and that is dialysis. When I was 23, roughly 23 years old, I went into kidney failure and ended up on dialysis for about 6 years. And around 2020, during the pandemic, I got the call that they had a transplant for me, and by the grace of God, I ended up getting a transplant that worked. And at this point, I've been going almost 5 years with the current transplant that I have, and it's been amazing. The reason why I felt a need to talk about dialysis is due to the fact that it seems that there is a stigma around dialysis. And I understand that there's a stigma around it because it's dialysis. It is a boring, uh, dim, dingy, soul crushing procedure that you have to get roughly 3 days a week, anywhere between 3 and 5 hours every time you go. And because of that, many people do not want to get it. I have seen over the past several years different stories of people either that I've known or I've met or have known of who have found themselves getting to the point of kidney failure and making the decision that they're going to make the best of their situation with their kidney failure until they die, essentially, because they don't want to go on dialysis. And I understand that's everybody's decision. And I'm not here to say that a person is bad or wrong because they made a decision not to be on dialysis. What I hope to do is to at least give you, from personal experience, a perspective on what dialysis is actually like, and that it is far better. Uh, I wouldn't say far better, but it is definitely not the end of your life. In fact, dialysis, as they told us, is life. Dialysis is life. It's a tough life. It's at times soul-crushing life, but it's life. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that experience was like. So I for years leading up to my time on dialysis, feared, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, feared going on dialysis. For whatever reason, I remember seeing some people. I think there was one person in my family, a cousin of mine, who was on dialysis, and she lived with it for a long time. And eventually she passed away. And there was also some other people that I had known who had been on dialysis. And they looked sad. They looked fatigued. And the idea of the kidneys failing and having to go to a machine every day or every other day, I didn't know how often you had to do it, but having to go to a machine to basically keep you alive sounded horrifying. Now, mind you, cancer treatments, chemotherapy and radiation and all these things you have to go through are obviously just as bad, if not even worse at times. Thankfully, at this point in my life, I've not had to go through cancer treatments. But the one thing about cancer is that if they can treat it and, essentially put the cancer into remission, eventually you don't have to do it anymore. You may have to go like several days in a row and, for several weeks or whatever. But eventually, if they can get into remission, especially, you don't have to get it anymore. Then, obviously then you have to watch this and that and hope it doesn't come back. Dialysis isn't like that. Once your kidneys go into failure, there is the chance that your kidneys can be revived, but the chances of that are very, very low. The chances of your original kidneys that you were born with regenerating and working again are extremely low. And so, barring some sort of thing like a transplant, there's a really good chance that you will spend the rest of your life going to a dialysis clinic or doing peritoneal dialysis in your home for the rest of your life. And even those who have the possibility of getting a kidney, though, still are very reluctant. They almost have this sense that they would rather die than deal with being on dialysis. Now, again, this is my experience. As I said, at 23 years old, I went into kidney failure. And it actually was not simply, one day they said you need to start going to dialysis. I went through it after several health problems had come to a head, essentially. I was having problems with my thyroid. I was having problems with my blood pressure, which obviously went hand in hand with the kidney failure. I was having problems with a cyst eventually that was growing on my spine. I was having trouble with my hemoglobin levels, which were dipping, and I was having to get blood transfusions all the time. A lot was going on. And eventually I ended up in the hospital for the problem that was on the cyst that was on my spine. It was weakening me. I would have to lift my leg because I couldn't simply lift it, and I couldn't grasp things with my right hand. Like, my whole right side was slowly becoming paralyzed. And they said eventually, if I hadn't gone to the hospital very soon, I would have simply just been crippled. And so it was a very important surgery. I had to get it. And it's when I got that surgery that I went into full kidney failure. Ended up in a coma for 3 months, or 3 weeks, thank God, not 3 months, for 3 weeks. And because of that, I was in a vegetative state. I was on life support. I was on a ventilator. Couldn't walk, couldn't eat. Really, I couldn't do anything. And from what I was told, that was possibly going to be my life for the rest of my life, which that's bad enough to have to live with. But I tried to, figure out, okay, how can I make this work? This is going to be my life, and this is my life. I have to find the best way to deal with it. By the grace of God, that's not what happened. Eventually, things got better. I was able to start to learn how to walk again. Eventually, I could breathe on my own. I could eat food and take care of myself for the most part. When I got out of the hospital, I was still I still needed some assistance with the wheelchair, but I was mostly to a walker. But eventually, I even got out of that. That was just that leg of the journey, and that was about 6 months of my life right there. But then I had to deal with the fact that every single day I had to go, I keep saying every day, that 3 days a week for roughly 3 hours a day, I had to go to dialysis, which is bad enough. Then there's the fatigue afterwards and all that kind of stuff. So I started out with a catheter port in my chest. If I was to expose myself right now, you would see that they're up here, actually, where my first port was put, and then later they put a more permanent port down here. And that was what was in my chest for a while. And that was how they did dialysis. They would pull it from there and, would cycle through as dialysis does. It puts back the clean and pulls out the liquid and all that kind of stuff. And that's how dialysis was. It was not fun, but it was easy, so to speak, because unlike regular dialysis, which I'll get to in a minute, there wasn't any real pain to it. They just hook you up, go through your dialysis treatment, and you're done. The only problem with that is if you keep your port, which a lot of people decide to do because they don't want to deal with the other way, is that your life expectancy is shortened significantly. And because it can get infected, and, you're going to die. A term that you'll hear a lot if you end up in a dialysis clinic. So, not wanting to die, I decided to go with what is called a fistula, which this is my fistula, you can see. Mine's actually one of the smaller ones. I've seen others who have much larger bulbous ones like on the bow of their arm. And so even though mine may look somewhat large, it's actually one of the smaller ones that I've seen from other people who've gotten them. And but yeah, that was the other option. There's also a graft you can get, but there's that, and then of course there's peritoneal dialysis and dialysis that you can do yourself. But anyway, peritoneal dialysis, which I never got, is where they stick a tube in your stomach. You hook it up to the machine at night, and that's how you get dialysis, and you basically get dialysis while you sleep. Again, another easy option, but I didn't want to go through life with a tube in my stomach. So I went with the most painful option, which is usually the only one that tends to be the one that works, right? And that is the fistula. Well, what makes the fistula so bad? Well, you have to get... Let me see, do I have any right now? Man, finally I decided to use it. Give me a second here. Yeah, so when you go to dialysis and you have to use a fistula, you have to get it done through your fistula, which is when they take one of your arteries, and one of your veins, and they sew it together, and that makes this sort of giant vein in your arm. And the reason they need such a large vein is because 3 days a week you have to have stuck in your arm a needle that is this thick. This is a 16 gauge needle. Now some can even be as thick as 14 gauge. And essentially, they take 2 of these needles and they literally look like this. They stick it into your arm. Alright? And that's attached to a tube. And then they take a second one of these needles and they stick it into your arm. And that's attached to another tube. The one tube pulls it through the needle, obviously, into the tube, and it recycles the blood, pulls out the liquid, and takes the clean blood and puts it back in. And that's how you go through dialysis. Now, as you're lying there, you have to be very still, because they're putting these 2 needles in, and then they, bandage it up, and you just essentially lie there for 3.5 hours. Because you have to have your legs up, you can't be sitting straight down, because that could cause your heart rate to drop, your blood pressure to drop, and you could pass out. Yeah, and die. So there's all those possibilities. So there's that. And then again, unlike when you have a port, they take out the port, snap everything back together, and you go home. When you have a fistula, they then have to take these needles that they've stuck in your arm, and they have to pull them out. Easy, right? Well, a 16 gauge needle, or 14 gauge needle, depending on which size they end up using, is a very large needle, which means coming out of a vein this big is not going to heal easily. So they then have to hold pressure on it for roughly 10, 15 minutes, depending on how bad the bleeding is. Sometimes they go, oh, nope, got to keep going. And they'll do it and hold it and hold it and hold it and hold it. Have a conversation. Hey, how's life? You like tennis? I don't like tennis. And then eventually they say, all right, looks like it's good. And then they stick a bunch of bandages on your arm, wrap it up, and then you go home. And sometimes it's good, but you also have to watch it for about probably a good half hour to an hour, because it could open up and then you'll start. In fact, there was a couple times when I was getting ready to leave, and I was just nonchalantly getting ready to say goodbye to everybody, and they're like pointing at me like, hey, and I look, and there's all this blood pouring off my arm, and I was like, oh yeah, I should probably, so I had to rush back to the chair, and they, hold it again and put it back in and all that stuff. And so yeah, there's that, and so that's after the treatment. Now a lot of these facilities, you can read, you can listen to music, you can do anything, or you could sleep, which is what I did most of the time, or you could watch. They usually have a television there, and see if there's anything on, And so, yeah, you can spend your time that way. So it's not like it doesn't have to just simply be just sitting there staring ahead the whole time. There are things that you can do if you want to. Now, uh, all that said, after the treatment is done, you go home. Now, another side effect of receiving dialysis is that you tend to be very tired. Now, sometimes you don't have um, the privilege of being tired, and by that I mean sometimes you have other things you have to go to. Sometimes I have to go to another doctor's appointment. Sometimes I have to go do other things. At one point, I had a part-time job, and I'd get done with dialysis. I'd have to be there at 6, and I get done around 9. I'd start around 6 and get done around 9, and then I got about 2 or 3 hour break in between, and then I would go to my part-time job, which those days were extremely hard because one of those days was Wednesday, which also meant church. So very, very busy, very exhausting day, which again, when I didn't have to go do that and I'd just come home, I would usually just sleep for long hours. And so really the only days that you have where you have any remote strength power are Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But that's 4 days out of the week. 4 days out of the week that you get, because otherwise you're probably going to be physically shot for all of Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, if those are the days that they choose. Sometimes it's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays that you get it, but either way. And sometimes, like, there's holidays where it'll fall on one of the days, and so they'll either have you 2 days in a row, or they'll have that day, your rest day, skip that day, and then do the day after. It just depends on what the holiday is and what the circumstances are. But that is dialysis, and of course, there are dietary restrictions. There's types of medicines that you have to take. If you're on dialysis, you probably still have high blood pressure, so you got to take blood pressure medicine. You also have to take why am I forgetting the? Oh yeah, you have to have a high protein diet, low on things like very, very little dairy, because it's high in I can't remember the word, but there's a word we had to use. It was a word that was used. It was said all the time. And you had to take a medicine for that. Right after you eat, you have to take it to sort of bundle it, bind it. It was a binder kind of medicine. And so, yeah, so that's how your diet is and things like that. It's a very weird diet. And you have to limit the amount of fluids you have. So I think it's roughly around maybe 40 ounces a day, if I remember correctly, that you're allowed to have. And yeah, that's your life. Your life is going to dialysis and coming home, resting for a whole day, getting a full day afterward. And it's very tough. And I know I was, when the first time, which hopefully, I don't have to get it anytime soon, but the first time I was on dialysis, I was 23 years old. I was relatively young at that time. I got off of dialysis at 29, and so now I've spent, by the grace of God, in my 30s, no dialysis and all that kind of stuff. I've had a transplant, and it's been an absolute blessing, miracle in my life. But I understand if you're going to be older, yeah, I get it. You're probably going to be even more tired. You might need 2 days to rest up. You might only get your weekends to be able to have any energy, and it does take a lot out of you, and it's a lot of pain, and there's things that you don't want to deal with that perhaps a younger person deals with. But what I can tell you from my experience is that as difficult as it sounds, as soul-crushing as life on dialysis can be, it is far better than just shriveling up and dying. It's far better. There were days where, because I'd have to get up really early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I'd have to get up at like 4:30 in the morning and go to dialysis, and it was a miserable drive there most of the time, because it didn't matter what the weather was. There were no, there was no like, oh, stuck in the house for a week. Can't do that. You gotta go to dialysis. You can't miss. And that's the problem too, because if you miss dialysis, like, that's another possibility that you're not going to be able to get a transplant, because they look at that. Faceless people who you'll never meet will determine, based on things like that, whether you're eligible to get a transplant. And so you have to be very vigilant. And it is so tough. And sometimes you want so badly to just give up and just stay at home, miss your treatment, because it's so much easier to just sleep, so much easier to just rest, it's so much easier to just not worry about it. But if you endure and are able to get on the transplant list, it's better. Once I got my transplant, it gave me an entirely new lease on life. Literally, genuinely, a brand new lease on life. Now, that's my story. That's what I went through. And again, I'm not saying that you're a bad person if you decide to not live that way and decide not to do it. But I'm trying to encourage you, if you're someone out there who is facing that potential issue in your life. It is very difficult. It is very tough. It is, again, as I keep using the term, soul-crushing at times. But it is so much better. There are so many things, so many experiences, so many good moments in my life that I would have never gotten to experience had I not been on dialysis. I'm not even talking about, I got my transplant and now life is even better. I would have never gotten to the transplant. There's that, yeah, sure. But even if I'd have never gotten my transplant and had still been on dialysis at this point, there were moments and experiences and people and things that I had the chance to experience in life because I chose to be on dialysis. And I don't know what those moments for you are, but you'll never find out if you give up. And so, I know this has been a long video, but if you're facing that decision, my hope is that you will, if nothing else, give it a chance. And if it's not great today, try it tomorrow. And if it doesn't work then, try it tomorrow. And the next day. And who knows? Eventually, dialysis may be the new lease on life that you never knew you could have had. And so I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.